What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. We've covered the sort of worst Pokemon I think come from the Paldea region, however there are some really cool ones too, to the point where I had a little trouble trying to nail down the final makeup of my team, but today I wanted to go over what I think would be the best team makeup for myself to use in the Gen 9 games and shower these new Pokemon with praise. Now, is this the team that I actually used when playing the games? Not necessarily. Is this the most competitively viable team? Absolutely not. But let's just start with the starters, and of course, for me, there was only one option that stood out with Fuecoco. I could immediately tell what the other two were, but the mystery of Fuecoco was so enticing. What exactly is it? The sheer possibilities of what it could turn into were more than enough to secure it as my choice. And that's really saying something because this only marks the second time ever that I've chosen the Fire-type starter, the last time being Charmander. It's not that I hate the other fire starters, I just usually like grass or water more. But here this little croc biped has more than enough character to lead the team. But once it did evolve, I must say I was not expecting it to wear such a fancy hat. And it's funny, when you look at it, you think, you know, that almost looks kind of like a bird's nest, because apparently they knew exactly what they were doing, as that leads right into Skeledirge, who basically has a symbiotic relationship with a flaming ghost bird, which is a totally unique situation that no other starter has. Not to mention its brilliant name that perfectly explains that it's an undead gator that sings mournful songs, which lines up perfectly with both its signature move and the flock of other sound-based attacks that Skeledirge has been getting all along. The ghost typing is nice too, just making sure that you're immune to any simple normal attacks that anyone might try. It's not like this is my brand new favorite overall Pokemon, but it could easily end up somewhere in the mid-30s, and that's really impressive for a brand new Pokemon. Not to mention the fact that Fire is pretty useful in any game in general, but also for either of the two gyms that are closest to your starting point. So the Skeledirge line is a pretty great choice in Paldea. Literally the only downside for me is that in playing Violet, I couldn't also pick up a Ceruledge, because that would just double up on types. But that could happen with plenty of Pokemon out there, so for me it'll be hard to ever pick up something else, but Skeledirge is a solid start to the team. Now, I have a bone to pick with Scarlet and Violet here, because why in the world did they make it so difficult to find a Wattrel in the games? This thing is amazing! It's the regional bird, so why are they hiding it away from the player? I can only imagine it's because it's actually a different type from the beginning, starting as an electric and flying type, something the Fletchling line couldn't even replicate. But I love the fact that Wattrel is loaded with electricity right from when you catch it. And it makes sense with the lore because it hunts water types for food. But that means that it can blast foes with lightning as an electric type that's inherently immune to ground. And it can also have the Volt Absorb ability, so you can double up on those immunities as well. This typing has always been good, but your choices were a Legend or a single-stage Flying Squirrel, but this time it evolves to become an excellent middle ground in Kilowattrel, which is yet another home run on the naming convention, literally amping up the power from the previous form. And like usual, these birds are very fast, but here they lean into the special attack, which helps to set them apart from the other regional birds, you know, more than the cool unique typing already does. Again, I really wish that it were easier to find, because I'm sure many more people would love it if they just picked one up, but I'm also kind of glad that it's more my own little secret that I can just break out on people and surprise. So Kilowattrel is a perfect second member for the team. Now, for the number 3 slot, I know a lot of people picked up the Knackley line, and I can see why, they're pretty good. But for me, there was only one pure rock type on my radar, that being Cloth. From right when it was introduced in the trailers, I was fascinated with Cloth. Some people may not like its design, but I think it's right at home in the Pokemon series, with this being an easily identified look that could also be beautifully translated to the sprite work done back on the Game Boy. Certainly far more than the twig limbs common in recent gens. So for me, Cloth looks more like a Pokemon than most of them from this region. And plus, I just like to think about how fun it would be to ride around on its back, maybe even up the side of a cliff. But on top of all that, Cloth is ridiculously strong, especially for the time in the game that you find it. Cloth can be caught right after you leave the school if you make a beeline east, where its impressive attack and defense can tower over all those weak base stages. And Cloth is also shockingly fast, like seriously, 75 is well outpacing most of the other bulky rock types. And then it can take them down with its immense coverage of Rock Smash or Metal Claw, or any number of ground moves since TMs are so accessible here, just making whatever you want. So maybe Cloth Cloth would be better off if it evolved, but when it's so dominant right from the start, and you can maintain that advantage while leveling up your whole team throughout the game, I think Cloth is a pretty great value pick that would be a help to most anyone, especially if you pick it up in the early game. Now, one that I wish were a bit earlier is Frigibax. But I do understand that as a pseudo-legendary it should at least be a little later. It would just be nice to be able to catch it without having to travel so far before doing anything else. But I do like the fact that it's an ice type, since for the most part these pseudo-legendaries are dragon type, this very line included. But that means that Baxcalibur inherently has an advantage over most of the others, while also having a signature ability that prevents it from getting burned, meaning that nothing will deter that massive 145 attack stat. And sure, it would be nice if they evolved a bit sooner as the levels go, but combining the powerful dragon type with the frail ice type results in a pretty imposing dinosaur, whose types perfectly complement each other and the Pokemon that we've already selected. Simply put, the Baxcalibur line becomes a commanding force that will use its many sharp edges to cut you down to size, and it makes this team far more intimidating just by standing close by. Now here's where things get a little rocky, because this conflicts with the Pokemon that I actually used versus the ones that I think would be best, since in the games I did use a Flamigo for a long time because it was just useful to have, but if I had my way, I would have loved to try out the Paldean Tauros. Not that I didn't run away from many of them, but I wanted a water-type variant, not finding one until it was far too late to use. But the Aqua form of Tauros once again fills critical holes in the type chart, since a strong water and fighting team member would come in handy a lot. Granted, it is another physical attacker, but I don't really see a fast, hard-hitting bull that can breathe underwater as a liability, especially when none of the other water types in this region particularly spoke to me. But riding this raging bovine across the seas would make me feel far more powerful. Even if I do think the design could be a bit more different, it's at least more instantly recognizable at a glance than the fire-type version. And yes, there are other fighting types that are stronger here, but Tauros is faster. So to me, it would make a brilliant addition to the overall team. And once again, things are murky, no pun intended, but I did use a Clodsire for a while in the game, and that typing was quite useful, and as soon as I found an Earthworm, I loved it. There's an odd simplicity to it, but I somehow love the vibe that it gives off when it breaks out those arms and wrecks everything. It's another one of those strong solo Pokemon that I apparently have a weak spot for. And of course, a pure steel type with massive defense is always going to be useful on any team. However, I feel like if I'm going to be making my team the best it can be, we probably need another specially focused Pokemon. In which case, we'll include the Pokemon that I used to replace Clodsire with Toedscruel. Obviously, it still has the ground type covered, which is part of why I picked it up in the first place, but it's also a grass type that was quite useful to cover the other types for much needed resistances to water and ground itself. However, despite these look-alike mushrooms having only moderate special attack, it is still better than most of the rest of my team, and their special defense is really what helps here, allowing them to better survive while pulling tricks like using health-draining attacks or throwing out status conditions and then spamming Hex. Having dual grass and ground stab should not be overlooked, but the speed on this thing is ridiculous. All those extra legs must really make it move because they had to invent a nerfing ability just so that it wouldn't immediately spore everything in the game. I guess Toedscruel is not technically one of my favorite top 6 Pokemon from Scarlet and Violet. I probably wouldn't even say that about Tauros either, but it is still pretty neat to turn an old sea-dwelling Pokemon into a mushroom years later. And having used one to round out my actual team showed me that Toedscruel slots in almost perfectly to the squad that I've been building thus far. And I really do love when I can gather so many types onto one team. But maybe what I appreciate most about Gen 9 is that team composition is actually variable. By this, I mean that in Gen 8, it seemed like most everyone was using the same few Pokemon with only 1 or 2 substitutions. But in Paldea, people are finding all sorts of new creations that they jive with, allowing for entire teams to be drastically different than what their friends might have. And even if I find some Pokemon a little too weird this time around, the fact that there are still more that I want to try out for at least another 1 or 2 playthroughs means that there are plenty of quality entries to go around in the Paldea region. But those are the Pokemon for my favorite team in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. For now, anyway. Which Gen 9 Pokemon do you like the best? Let me know down in the comments. Also, be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.